Drenched in sweat and barely able to catch his breath, the boy realized that he had fallen into a deadly trap. Clutching his wounded hand, he looked at the back of his companion, whose appearance inspired only involuntary awe. But there was still a stubborn fire burning in his eyes that did not allow him to simply give up in the face of death. After all, right in front of them, in all its terrible grandeur, stood the ancient demonic giant. The demoness instantly condensed dark magic, ready to enter into an unequal fight without hesitation. However, the monster only grinned ominously, making it clear that this was exactly the kind of resistance he had been craving. Noticing his protector's anxiety, the guy felt the oppressive atmosphere becoming unbearable. And at that very moment, a sudden flash of spatial magic sharply squeezed his mind. Reality around him distorted, transporting him into a completely different, majestic hall in the middle of silence. But as soon as he looked around, he realized with amazement that this mysterious place was already familiar to him. A blinding light streamed through the majestic dome, causing him to stand still before the grandeur of this sacred place. But before he could recover from the shock, the spatial vortex suddenly threw out another guest after him. The girl, disoriented by the sudden movement, held her head with difficulty, trying to comprehend what was happening. Having barely come to her senses, she turned around sharply, sensing someone's presence very close. And only a moment later did she realize that she had landed right on top of her wounded and hard-to-get-up comrade. She quickly stepped back and looked at his bleeding body with alarm. He quietly let her know that the nightmare was behind them and they were finally safe. Meanwhile, far in the dark depths of the underground castle, the atmosphere was tense to the limit. The gigantic demonic colossus was burning with bloodlust, emitting a suffocating dark aura. However, the horned mistress standing before him only accepted his threatening appearance with cold confidence, completely unafraid of the approaching storm. The crushing monster bared its teeth, ready to crush into dust anyone who stood in its way. Bringing down a giant fist from above, he attempted to crush his insolent opponent with one blow. But she only briefly watched the mad attack, without even moving from her spot. At the same time, in the castle, the girl looked in horror at the bloody hands of her companion. Concentrating, the young man tamed the scarlet-black energy raging within him, capable of destroying everything around him. She couldn't utter a word, feeling the oppressive, barely contained force emanating from him. Squeezing his transformed hand, he finally took control of the dark magic. And, rising to his full height, he looked with a cold gaze at his companion, who had frozen at his feet. However, she suddenly felt a hidden magical potential flaring up inside her. Noticing this, the young man only smiled slightly, making it clear that everything was going according to plan. He leaned towards her, trying to calm the frightened girl. Her face was frozen in amazement. She did not believe that the man standing in front of her was capable of such mercy. But as he rose again, he surrounded his hand with an ominous aura, causing her to shrink in fear again. His gaze remained unperturbed, despite the traces of a hard battle on his face. He turned his back, taking one last look at the stunned girl. Suddenly, a powerful blow shook the walls of the abandoned castle, causing the young man to instantly become wary. Outside, the giant demon continued to furiously destroy everything around, trying to get to the winged maiden. But she easily intercepted the monster's huge fist with her tentacles, squeezing it in a death grip. The demonic mistress easily withstood the giant's onslaught, demonstrating the true superiority of her strength. Feeling the echoes of this collision, the young man realized that the decisive battle had already begun. The woman felt with alarm how reality around her was beginning to collapse. The wounded young man tried to hold her back, begging her not to risk her life. But magic had already filled the entire space, illuminating the room with a blinding light. She understood that delay now was tantamount to certain death. Meanwhile, in the secret complex, the guards froze in front of the activated portal. Time was slipping through my fingers, and the denouement was inexorably approaching. Light filled the entire room, shattering the illusion of safety into tiny pieces. In this chaos, the young man extended his hand to her, becoming her only support. There was not a drop of doubt or fear in his gesture. Struck by his resilience, she looked at him with completely different eyes. Their palms touched, uniting their forces into a single stream. Now they stood together, ready to face the inevitable. His gaze showed an unwavering will to protect her at any cost. However, the wounded demonic mistress begged them with all her might to flee. Her fading gaze warned of an approaching nightmare. After all, the enraged giant had already risen upward, clenching his bloody fist. With a terrible grin, the monster fell straight at them. An ancient evil longed to crush into dust anyone who stood in its way. But the young man instantly released crimson energy, intercepting the blow, and in his flashing red eye a passionate grin of a true warrior played. The girl behind him screamed in surprise, realizing the mortal danger. Realizing that time was running out, she instantly raised her hand and summoned spatial magic. The flashing blue glow became their only chance to escape from this deadly trap. The massive demon attempted to unleash its full fury, but the crimson spikes blocked its monumental bulk. The young man squeezed the crimson energy right into his palm, subordinating the uncontrollable force to his will. Furious scarlet whirlwinds surrounded the monster, buying it precious seconds to teleport. Clenching his fist until it cracked, the boy put all his remaining magic into the final impulse. A powerful explosion literally tore apart the space around them, pulling them both into a glowing rift. Already in the flow of the transition, the companion was overcome with doubts about the correctness of this crazy decision. But the young man only looked back coldly, firmly believing in the path he had chosen. The next moment, they were thrown into an unknown forest shrouded in crimson fog. Coming to his senses on dry ground, the guy rose with difficulty and turned to his companion. Noticing that the deadly transition had ended, the girl looked at him with genuine joy. For the first time in a long time, a calm, confident smile appeared on the young man's face. Embarrassed, she gently adjusted a strand of her hair, admitting how important his protection was to her. However, a second before they could exhale, a giant, ominous shadow rose up out of space above her. A wild, paralyzing horror froze in the young man's eyes. He rushed forward with all his might, breaking into a desperate cry. But it was too late. A huge, clawed paw instantly closed around the helpless girl. And from the gap, a chilling, triumphant gaze of a terrible monster stared at him. A deadly blow pierced her body, tearing a scream full of inhuman pain from her mouth. The demonic giant merely triumphed, emitting a crushing dark aura. Having thrown the tortured girl down, the monster was counting on her quick death, but the hero managed to rush forward. At the last second, he caught her in his arms, barely saving her from a final fall. Blood gushed from her wounds, and her breathing became shallower with each passing moment. The guy looked at her pale face in horror, refusing to believe the nightmare that was happening. The thick shadow of death was already hanging over her, dragging the remaining sparks of life into oblivion. A chilling despair gripped his mind. He realized that he was catastrophically late. Frantically trying to find a way to save her, he was faced only with his own powerlessness. The girl barely opened her eyelids, fixing a fading but warm gaze on him. His eyes were filled with a mixture of unbearable pain and deep, soul-rending regret. Despite the terrible wounds, a quiet farewell smile played on her bloody lips. He carefully pressed her to himself, barely holding back the scream bursting from his chest. A single tear rolled down her cheek, capturing all the bitterness of this loss. At that moment, the old world inside him finally collapsed, giving way to pure darkness. Her last quiet breath was interrupted, and her body and his arms went completely limp. Trembling with unbearable loss, he bowed his head over the one he could not protect, and then the space around them was filled with an eerie, scarlet aura of awakening power. Deadly energy surged over the edge, responding to the uncontrollable pain in his heart. He looked up, and there was nothing human left in his gaze, only a thirst for cruel and merciless reprisal. A crimson light filled the ancient castle as the air grew tense with deadly tension, and the next moment the winged knight's blade encountered fierce resistance. His opponent only bared his teeth, reveling in every blow and feeling the blood boil in his veins. The knight unleashed all his might, trying to crush the enemy with one swift lunge. But he easily blocked the crushing blade, demonstrating terrifying strength. There was no trace of fear on his face, only the glee of a madman reveling in the moment. He grinned, mockingly hinting that his comrades had already finished off all of the knight's allies. With every word he tried to sow doubt and break the will of the warrior standing before him. A flash of deadly energy lit up the darkness, splitting the space between them. However, not a single muscle twitched in the knight's gaze, which left the enemy dumbfounded. A sudden dark counterblow sent the mocker flying backwards. Blood spurted from the deep wound, instantly cooling his ardor. The winged knight simply firmly stated that his faith in his comrades was unshakable and that foolish speeches would not work on him. But the enemy grinned venomously again, promising to punish him for his blind hope. Suddenly, his mocking grin instantly froze, giving way to genuine amazement. Something unexpected and eerie began to happen in the depths of the gloomy hall. The ominous confidence on his face finally gave way to anxious incomprehension. Somewhere in the shadows, something ancient came to life, causing the stone vaults to tremble with awakened power. A dark mark appeared right on his chest, causing a sharp, burning pain. And turning to the knight, he realized that this battle had just taken a completely different turn. My name is Mingzi Hong, and from now on I am the head of the Guild of True Villains. The death blow pierced space, leaving behind only an ominous echo. Is everything that is happening just part of someone's grand plan? Heavy footsteps cut through the silence, approaching the site of the recent massacre. The tension in the air reached its limit, forcing even seasoned fighters to hold their breath. Anxiety pierced my heart. Where should Kim Tae-young and Ricky disappear to? Through the crimson haze, a silhouette approached, carrying a motionless body in its arms. The look is filled with a bitter awareness of irreparable loss. The lifeless body falls into his arms, and time seems to freeze at that fateful moment. A bright flash of anger is reflected in wild, pain-clouded eyes. Those around froze in stupor, afraid to break the heavy silence. The face is distorted by dull pain, reflecting the full depth of the surging despair. The last words escape the lips with bitter regret about what did not come true. Longing and sorrow can be seen on the faces of those who were late to save what was most precious. The rage inside me boils with renewed vigor, forcing me to clench my fists until my bones crunch. With determination in his gaze, he rejects any attempts at help, intending to walk this path to the end alone. Bewilderment can be seen in the looks of those who do not dare to believe what is happening. The tense face froze into a mask of grim determination in the face of the inevitable. Meanwhile, far away, within the walls of the American Players Association, destinies were being decided. High-ranking officials expressed deep gratitude, recognizing the scale of their unpaid debt to the hero. However, even the elimination of the consequences of the disaster caused colossal damage to the association. All those present were eagerly awaiting the reason for which they had been gathered for this urgent meeting. The tension in the room grew with each passing second, as there was too much at stake. But amidst the general excitement, one of the leaders maintained an icy, almost menacing calm. At this moment, the name of Kim Tae-young, whose actions changed absolutely everything, came into the spotlight again. The young man himself, ignoring the distrust of those gathered, was preparing to present irrefutable evidence. As soon as he made a move, the room was filled with a powerful magical aura, causing the officials to shudder. Even seasoned veterans were amazed to recognize this rare and incredibly dangerous technique. A glowing cube materialized in the young man's hands, an artifact capable of storing other people's memories. Concentrating his mana, he prepared to reveal the secrets that had been so carefully hidden from the rest of the world. Memories of a woman, in whose chest, despite everything, the very heart of a monster beat, flashed before my eyes. The vortex of power thickened, preparing to spill out the deeply buried truth. Taehyung confidently held the memory stream, projecting it directly in front of the top management. Threads of light wrapped around the cube, triggering a continuous process of reproducing hidden events. The association's leaders could not hide their shock and anger at such audacity on the part of the young player. However, Taehyung's gaze remained unwavering. He knew that the force of truth was on his side. The skeptics in the room eagerly awaited what exactly the ability of the memorized artifact would reveal to them. Suddenly, the magic crystal began to hum, filled with a colossal amount of information. A blinding flash of azure light instantly filled the entire space, immersing those present in someone else's past. And before their eyes finally appeared the true, terrifying face of the one whose plans threatened all of humanity. Memories transported her to an ancient sanctuary where the true rulers of the dark depths sat on monumental thrones. Looking at the ancient writings carved at the foot of the giant hall, the girl instantly realized the terrifying truth. Each figure surrounding the monster they knew was a high duke, capable of crushing entire worlds. Among them sat the ferocious king of the beasts, whose mere presence inspired primal fear. The captivating and deadly Rosaria, the mistress of the succubi, stood frozen nearby. The icy and arrogant vampire lord maintained an eerie silence, looking down on everything. The many-eyed Beelzebub embodied the eternal hunger and chaos of the dark dimensions. Dragonlord Hazard sat proudly on her pedestal, exuding crushing power. The mysterious Jormungandr hid his inexhaustible ancient magic in the shadows, and above many of them towered the majestic Lucifer, the symbol of absolute dominion. Touching the cold surface of the stone steel, she read with horror the history of this unholy union. But it was not this army of rulers that inspired the greatest awe, but the pinnacle of the pantheon, where the empty throne stood. Suddenly, her immersion in the past was interrupted by a strange, chilling voice that spoke directly to her mind. The ancient giant, emerging from the darkness, looked with disdain at the impudent mortal who dared to penetrate their secrets. The vision ended, and the researcher, returning to reality, began to convulse from the light that overwhelmed him. Barely catching his breath, with a trembling voice, he began to reveal to his colleagues the truth, which crossed out all previous assessments. Humanity believed that the threat was limited to only a few entities, without even realizing their true number. Fear gripped his heart, for even one such duke was enough to completely wipe civilization off the face of the earth. Overwhelmed by the realization of the inevitable chaos, he sank limply onto the table in front of the shocked audience, and only the young man, absorbing the remaining grains of memory, realized with a numbness the scale of the impending catastrophe. In his dark memories, his ally succumbs to doubt, not believing in the final fall of the ruler. The old demon admits his defeat, but the darkness gathering around him tells a different story. A barely noticeable grin flashes across his comrade's face. He's not ready to accept such a simple ending. Orgel himself merely arrogantly rejects any help, declaring that his return was inevitable. Ready to crush anyone for showing disrespect, he forces his interlocutor to retreat meekly. The demon begins to reveal the secret of an ancient power that was controlled by only one creature. His evil grin reveals a terrible truth hidden behind millennia of silence. Before them appears the majestic image of the one who was once called the King of the Underworld. This title makes the young man freeze, realizing how deep the abyss of ancient secrets is. Pointing to the coming inevitability, the vision gradually loses its clarity. Falling to his knees from the weight of the revelations he received, the guy barely maintains control over his mind. The towering shadow of the ancient monster leaves an indelible mark on his mind, and yet a cold smile appears on his lips. Now he knows what they have to face. Returning to reality, he sees high-ranking officials anxiously discussing the current crisis. Taking a decisive step forward, the young man interrupts their quiet conversation with a question about what to do next. The association representatives turn around, frowning at such insolence. But the guy makes it clear this catastrophe has long since gone beyond the borders of one state. The official's gaze grows heavier, because he understands the full validity of these words. The young man calls on them to show respect for the memory of the deceased and accept her last will, and the heavy silence that reigned in the office became the best proof that he was right. The chairman lowers his gaze, realizing that there is no point in hiding the truth any longer. The young man speaks of a figure of light, hidden in the depths just below this place. These words finally convince the management that the guy has become their most valuable ally. Focused and prepared for any outcome, he awaits an answer. A heavy rumble echoes through the complex as massive doors begin to open downwards. The chairman personally escorts him to a secret area hidden deep underground. The rarest resources from the abyss, inaccessible to any organization on the planet, flowed here. But the path to that power was paved through a hell that humanity could barely cope with. The source of everything was something that was recovered from the bottom of the Pacific Ocean. The old man still remembers the sticky fear that gripped the research group. Stepping onto the edge of the platform, the guest freezes in shock at what he sees. A giant figure of pure energy rises up in a huge capsule tank. The young man cannot utter a word in the face of this greatness. A tense gaze is fixed on the source that changed the fate of the world. The chairman confirms that history has long hidden an object of such scale. He continues to proclaim it as the main salvation of humanity, but suddenly, the atmosphere in the sealed room becomes filled with an uneasy tension. The creature inside the capsule begins to move and slowly opens many scarlet eyes. Horror grips those present as the alien intelligence turns its gaze upon them, and the colossal creature, thought to be only a tool, turns its terrible power against them. The giant in the capsule awakens, causing everyone who thought he was just an experimental specimen to freeze in horror. The project managers are unable to hide their panic, realizing that control has been completely lost. 3 scarlet eyes cut through the darkness, capturing every living soul in this room. The staff are terrified as all their precautions have proven useless. The survivors are frantically trying to call in containment units before the situation gets completely out of control. But the giant chooses only one target, and his chilling gaze is directed straight at the hero. At this moment, the guy realizes the ancient creature has not only awakened, it is trying to establish direct mental contact with him. The space shakes from the release of colossal energy, destroying the protective capsule. The laboratory shakes under the pressure of inhuman power, flying in all directions. However, the hero has no intention of retreating and releases his dark aura, preparing to learn the hidden truth. 2 streams of incredible power collide, tearing apart the boundaries of reality. And the next moment, their consciousness is transferred into a dazzling mental space. Here, among the ancient columns, hovers the majestic figure of an alien entity. Looking calmly at the giant, the guy prepares to accept this invisible dialogue. The alien looks down condescendingly on the mortal who dared to enter into a mental connection with him. He questions the absolute power of a man-made deity created by human hands, just hinting that this whole form is nothing more than a vector indicating a direction, the direction leading to his real, true body hidden in the darkness of space. The words of the ancient entity force the hero to realize the true scale of the impending threat, and in the face of this boundless mystery, he understands that the real battle for the future is just beginning. The entity reveals the truth to him, explaining the true reason for his awakening after his fateful meeting with the king. Unable to contain his emotions, the hero demands answers, trying to find out why he was allowed to go back in time. But at that very moment, the space around them begins to distort, plunging him into a whirlpool of visions. A vision of the apocalypse flashes before my eyes, gates bursting open and legions of monsters filling the skies. Looking around, the hero feels a chilling anxiety from the unfolding chaos. The crimson sunset and the ruins of the lost city seem to take him back to the darkest period of history. Walking through the ghostly shadows of the past, he notices an exhausted young man losing his last strength. He falls powerlessly to the ground, no longer able to resist the impending death. A terrifying monster emerges from the bloody fog, ready to tear its helpless victim to pieces. The voice of the entity explains that right now the hero is contemplating the memories of the one with whom it all began. At this critical moment, a hitherto hidden pure energy flares up in the young man's clenched fist. An incredible burst of magic instantly hits the monster, tearing it to shreds. The hero freezes in amazement, struck by the incredible power that has awakened within the man. In fact, this youth was born from a fragment of an ancient god, lost among the spatial rifts. At a turning point of despair, he realized his purpose and set out on the path destined by fate itself. Watching this legend, the hero realizes what a great power stands before him. A dark sphere appears in the open heavens, and a blinding flame flares up inside it. From this devastating whirlwind, a divine silhouette emerges, radiating primordial light. The heavenly being smoothly extends his palm, ready to reveal to the world his true absolute power. A cleansing wave of light engulfs the hordes of darkness, incinerating monsters and transforming the battlefield. Seated upon its majestic throne, this being embodied the very purity and pristine light of creation. But even in the face of absolute greatness, the lords of the abyss on their dark thrones showed no sign of fear. Watching this ancient confrontation, our hero suddenly realizes the absurdity of the madness that is unfolding. At that very moment, the barrier of reality begins to crack at the seams, unable to withstand the colossal pressure of 2 colliding worlds. From the rifts of space, blazing with primordial fury, legions of winged defenders rush into battle. From the depths of darkness, gigantic monsters rise to meet them, ready to swallow the sun itself. The creator looks on dispassionately at this endless slaughter, where life and death merge in a single deadly dance. The lords of the underworld personally lead their armies forward, painting the skies in the crimson hues of ceaseless war. Ancient dragons and celestial messengers clash in a furious battle that shakes the very foundations of the universe. But even divine light is not immune to suffering when the battle takes away the last of one's strength. Darkness inexorably tightens its grip, dragging the shining deity into the abyss of oblivion under the grinding of the gears of fate. And it is at this fateful moment, on the verge of complete extinction, that a spark of new hope is born. The true meaning of the mysterious power that was given to him from the very beginning emerges in the hero's mind. Turning around, he comes face to face with the one who has been invisibly guiding his destiny all this time. Now, all the pieces of the puzzle are falling into place, revealing the frightening truth about his endless regressions. The great being silently looks upon the man whose spirit has surpassed all conceivable boundaries of the divine plan. Having gone through hundreds of deaths and rebirths, the young man no longer feels fear of his destiny. This mysterious observer personifies eternity itself, indifferent to the fates of mere mortals. But instead of despair, a light, confident smile appears on the hero's face. After all, he will choose his own path. Shrouded in a blinding radiance, he steps forward, ready to rewrite the history of this world from scratch. His gaze is directed forward, to where the fate of all humanity is being decided. The heavy lift carries him with a roar upwards, to a reality that awaits an alarm. A heavy, oppressive silence fell over the association's headquarters. Everyone understood that the outcome of this meeting would change the world. The leadership is in a panic, wondering if the strongest hunter can survive a confrontation with the ultimate being. The massive doors creak open, letting in the blinding light of a decayed divine dimension. Kim Tae-hyung himself comes out to meet the crowd, his silhouette now radiating an incomprehensible pure power. Shocked officials immediately rush to him, desperately demanding answers about the fate of their self-proclaimed creator. But the young man answers their questions only with a cold, detached look, devoid of his previous doubts. He calmly drops words that make the hearts of those present freeze in horror. The deity is not simply defeated, it has become a part of himself. One of the high-ranking leaders, shrouded in a furious aura, refuses to believe what is happening and demands an immediate explanation. Step by step, he closes the distance, trying to force Tae-hyung to obey using force of authority. However, the guy doesn't even turn around, demonstrating absolute superiority over those who previously decided destinies. His confident gait echoes loudly on the cold slabs of the square. The tension between them rises to the limit, the air literally crackles with the clash of wills. The hunter continues on his way past the confused guards, who no longer dare to block his way. In his eyes burns the flame of a new era, where he sets the rules of the game himself. Walking past the angry leader, Tae-hyung quietly but powerfully drops a phrase that takes his breath away. This chilling look makes it clear that the former subordination has been erased forever. Desperate orders to stop are heard from behind the retreating hero, but they sound pitiful and helpless. The stunned witnesses can only watch in silence as the man who, in a matter of seconds, transformed from an ordinary man into the rightful ruler of this world. The leaders who observed it understand that the previous balance of power has been destroyed forever. After all, now he is driven by only one desire, to discover the true limits of his power. And no authorities are able to block his path while he takes his first steps to the top. The elders' furious cries are drowned out by the heavy silence that hangs over them. Even those who considered themselves the arbiters of fate now feel a cold sweat of fear run through them. They try to regain control of the situation, but their anger is just a mask to cover up their own powerlessness. In the face of such a crushing will, they can only look at each other in confusion. The hero himself does not intend to look back, his gaze is directed far into the future. From now on, the name of Kim Tae-hyung will be carved into the history of this world in completely different colors. A world that recently mourned those who fell in this endless war. In a war against the creatures of the abyss who know no mercy and are ready to wipe humanity off the face of the earth. The tears shed and the bitterness of loss united the survivors, but brought only temporary peace. And now, after a brutal confrontation with one of the rulers of darkness, Kim Tae-hyung appears before the heads of the association. Their anxious questions about his condition seem like mere noise against the backdrop of the nightmare he has experienced. Powerful patrons are trying to figure out if his plans will change now that the threat of the abyss has taken on concrete faces. But the young man keeps his cool, realizing that behind each of their questions lies personal interest. Seeing his intransigence, the management decides to lay their cards on the table and entrust him with top-secret information. After all, events outside this room are developing with alarming speed. The truth they hid from the public turns out to be too dark. While the heroes were fighting on the front lines, a new epidemic, unknown to humanity, began to spread rapidly across the world. This news takes the protagonist by surprise, causing him to shudder at the scale of the impending disaster. A top-secret investigation reveals chilling details of the conspiracy. In the depths of secret laboratories, biological weapons were being created that could wipe humanity off the face of the earth. The threads led to an underground guild of villains, but behind them there was clearly someone much more powerful. After all, ordinary criminals would never have had the resources and technology to create such a perfect pathogen. The only way out was to begin an immediate and merciless purge of all those involved. But suddenly, a name emerges that makes everyone present hold their breath. Just one question about Min Ji-hong instantly shatters the fragile calm in the room. The image of a madman whose cruel grin once instilled primal terror and all who stood in his way comes to mind. The realization of how far this once great warrior has fallen forces us to break his long-standing silence. They plan to keep this dark secret until the grave, but the time to hide the truth has finally run out. It all began many years ago when an ominous gate suddenly opened in a remote province. Realizing the scale of the threat, the cleanup team rushed into battle, prepared for the worst outcome. But having reached the epicenter, they froze in mute amazement before the picture that opened up. Amidst the torn-apart, high-ranking monsters stood a wounded 7-year-old child. This little monster in human form single-handedly destroyed the entire dungeon. Seeing the unprecedented, frightening potential before him, the man realized that he could not leave it alone. Thus began their grueling training, designed to channel this destructive force in the right direction. The boy absorbed the instructions like a sponge, never complaining of inhuman pain and fatigue. And very soon, while still a teenager, he rose to the very top of the hierarchy of the country's most powerful magicians. But at what point did this ideal student stray from the righteous path? The one in whose eyes the thirst for knowledge once burned now seemed completely alien and cold. The founder of the association often thought back to the past, trying to find that fatal mistake. The young man grew incredibly quickly, and along with his strength came a frightening arrogance. For him, other people's lives became nothing more than dust under his feet on the path to absolute greatness. His gaze no longer expressed sympathy, it was frozen only in the chilling calculation of a predator. When the elders tried to appeal to his reason and asked him about the reasons for his cruelty, the answers shocked them to the core. He sincerely did not understand why he should waste his energy on protecting the weak if they had to fight for survival themselves. The crazy philosophy of the young genius plunged even seasoned masters into awe. Having crossed the final line, he rejected the laws of man and became the most dangerous international criminal, and now his former mentor had no choice but to admit the bitter, stifling truth. The blame for the appearance of this monster lay entirely on him. Taehyung listened to these lamentations in silence, feeling a wave of righteous anger boiling inside him. He could not forgive his father for not stopping the madness in time and allowing the tragedy to happen. But the old man only looked pleadingly at his son, realizing that the old wounds could no longer be healed. The tension in the room grew, threatening to destroy the fragile family union once and for all. The appearance of an ally who had arrived to coordinate the suppression operation interrupted their difficult conversation. Taehyung turned around abruptly, realizing that the hour of reckoning and his personal choice had finally arrived. He did not hesitate to volunteer to take part in this dangerous mission personally. Ahead of them lay a great citadel, where the fate of the apostate who had betrayed everything they believed in would be decided. Stepping into the majestic hall, shrouded in an ominous crimson glow, he immediately felt the suffocating grandeur of this place. From the semi-darkness, a piercing gaze of scarlet eyes, concealing an ancient and ruthless power, stared at him. On the majestic throne sat the demon queen herself, whose appearance radiated deadly grace and absolute power. A sudden realization made his heart clench, making him doubt whether he himself had unwittingly caused this disaster. But the ruler only smiled condescendingly, amused by his obvious confusion. The space between them seemed like an insurmountable abyss, separating two sworn enemies at this fateful moment. She leisurely told him about the recent guests, whose appearance only promised new troubles and conspiracies behind his back. Every word she said dripped like poison, penetrating deep under his skin and testing his composure. The demoness's mocking tone betrayed her genuine pleasure in someone else's helplessness and anger. However, the young man did not allow anger to cloud his judgment, meeting her mockery with icy determination. His inflexibility made the mistress wary for a moment, sensing a change in his aura. The air between them was tense, ready to explode at any second in an inevitable collision. And then he said out loud what was to change the rules of the game, the inevitability of a coming race war. The news of her meeting with a higher being instantly wiped the arrogant grin from her face, replacing it with genuine bewilderment. He revealed to her the secret of the fragment of God, which could become the key to the salvation or final destruction of this world. His plan went against everything the great powers had planned, offering a completely different way to resolve the conflict. Rosaria froze, realizing the enormity and madness of what she had heard. The gears in her head started spinning at a furious speed. Events were developing too quickly, outpacing any of her calculations. A new, predatory interest flared in her eyes, ready to develop into a devastating storm. But he was ready to face this storm head-on, because there was no turning back for him. The guy's gaze remained firm, focused on his main goal. After all, he once faced insurmountable obstacles and titans of this world. But every step along the way made him look back, remembering how it all began. Those times when he was weak and suffered only humiliation from those who considered themselves stronger. Days of loneliness, when even those close to him could not understand his choice, leaving him alone on a snowy street, and rare, fleeting memories of warmth and family happiness, which he vowed to protect at all costs. He had to face true evil, ancient demons and rulers of darkness thirsting for his blood. He stood before the thrones of those whose mere glance could crush an ordinary mortal. But it was at this moment of despair that a mysterious, blinding light appeared before him, an entity of incredible power who offered him a deal that could change his very destiny. This union burned him from the inside, requiring incredible fortitude and acceptance of darkness for the sake of a great goal. And now, having returned to reality, he no longer felt a drop of fear. His cry shook the walls of the ancient hall, expressing all the pent-up rage and determination. The guy openly declared that he was ready to go against the entire world of demons, just to stop this senseless war. In the reflection of the demon lord's eyes, he appeared not just as a man, but as an unstoppable threat. Behind him, that same divine power awakened again, ready to lift him to the pinnacle of power. Looking at this, the Queen of the Abyss could not help but let out a breath of admiration, amazed by his audacity. But the guy wasn't going to waste time on empty talk and took a confident step forward. A colossal whirlwind of crimson energy instantly erupted around him, tearing apart space itself. And the ruler of the demons could only ask in horror how an ordinary person had managed to step beyond the boundaries of the impossible. Watching this impudent mortal accept the power of one of the fragments of God himself with a slight smirk, she could not hide her amazement. The tension in the hall was suddenly replaced by the loud, ringing laughter of the mistress, echoing through the gloomy vaults. She admitted that she had once fiercely opposed the will of the former king to transfer his great legacy to someone outside, not believing that a worthy successor could be found in the world. However, now, looking at his unshakable confidence, a genuine interest in this mysterious guest flashed in her eyes. All this pathos and feigned hostility finally melted away, giving way to a completely different, deeper conversation. Images from the distant past, when the greatness and divine light of the former ruler seemed unattainable, flashed through her memory. Those times when she herself was only a young witness to epical changes were forever etched into her wounded heart. Realizing that the masks had been dropped, the Demon Queen proposed to discard unnecessary etiquette and officially recognize the young man as her full partner. Having filled a glass with crimson wine, she decided to get down to business and asked what exactly he knew about the coming clash of races. The young man merely mysteriously avoided a direct answer, making her suspect that he had not revealed all of his cards. And although the queen was slightly irritated by how skillfully she had been fooled, she had no choice but to accept the rules of his game. Taking a deep breath, she decided to share the grain of truth that she possessed, despite the many blank spots in the story. The mistress explained that the end of the current war would inevitably provoke a global conflict, as the growing power of their king frightened the higher beings. Those who rule in the heavenly heights will never allow a mortal being to rise to the level of true gods. The guy listened attentively, thoughtfully swirling the ruby liquid in his glass and trying to reconcile what he heard with his own plans. But when the queen's gaze became deadly serious, the air in the hall instantly turned cold with an invisible threat. She spoke the name of the one who stands at the head of this divine tyranny, the great dragon king named Baal. Hearing this name, the young man froze, realizing the true scale of the forces that he would soon have to face. It turned out that this ancient monster had once acquired the power of a god, but rejected the predestined path and committed the greatest betrayal. And now the whole world stood on the threshold of a grandiose massacre, where gods, demons, and people were destined to meet in the last decisive battle. The lords of the underworld wasted no time, secretly gathering their forces and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Their secret alliances were built on mutual benefit, where every word was weighed with the utmost precision. But behind the ostentatious politeness lurked a cold calculation and a willingness to betray a partner at the first sign of weakness. She played her game slowly, trying to unravel the true intentions of the mysterious guest. After all, in this ruthless war for power, trust was an unaffordable luxury. Our hero understood the rules of this game perfectly well and behaved with absolute calm, not showing his excitement. Images of those he had failed to save from Orgel's merciless hand still floated through his mind. The very same ruler before whose throne millions trembled and whose shadow hung over all living things. Suddenly, the silence of the negotiations was broken by the alarming visit of a maid who brought urgent news. The atmosphere in the room instantly became tense when the mistress of the castle received a mysterious report in her hands. Every line of this message promised a radical change in the balance of power. A dangerous spark of excitement flashed in the demoness's eyes. Fate itself had presented them with a long-awaited chance, and now the time has come for the hero to prove his loyalty to his contract with his actions. The road led them into scorched lands under a crimson sky, where the air was filled with the smell of blood and ash. Here, in the great arena of death, a merciless battle for survival was played out. The fury of the battle reached its peak, and the blades clashed in a deadly dance. The enemy proved to be incredibly fast and strong, striking with devastating ferocity. Even the strongest defense could not withstand this onslaught, crumbling under the onslaught of insane power. A deadly blow brought the valiant warrior to the ground, causing her loyal subjects to shudder. Grand Succubus Musairon, a legendary fighter of the highest rank, found herself on the brink of death, and this outcome could forever change the course of the war. The triumphant enemy only mocked the defenders, declaring that even Rosaria's favorite minions were nothing special. A terrible, contemptuous smile played on her disfigured face, foreshadowing imminent reprisal. But even the defeated warrior refused to surrender, shouting words of defiance straight into the face of her executioner. In response, the cruel invader only pinned her to the ground, demonstrating her absolute superiority. One crushing blow finally crushed all hope of resistance, causing the loyal subjects to shudder. In the face of a frightened army, the harsh law of the abyss was established, where only the strongest survives. The monster proclaimed that none of them were worthy to compare either to herself or to her great master, the Bloody Duke. From now on, the lands of this scorched desert were to pass completely into the possession of the merciless Ikamon. But the conqueror's triumphal march was interrupted by the sudden appearance of someone no one expected to see here, an ordinary person. His calm, cold gaze made the monster freeze for a moment in bewilderment. With a cheeky grin, the stranger announced that he too served this proud lady and had come to claim his right to battle. At this turning point, it was worth remembering how, in the deepest depths of the abyss, a new source of power was born. The mysterious energy of the fallen crystal was mercilessly shattered by the wild inhabitants of these lands. Obeying only primal instincts, the simplest creatures absorbed forbidden grains of power, changing their flesh. Soon, among the mindless creatures of chaos, those who surpassed their brethren began to be born. True leaders appeared, giants, endowed not only with crushing power, but also with the rudiments of intelligence. They led huge flocks, ready to tear apart anyone who dared to violate the boundaries of their territory. These were no longer just mindless predators, but dangerous, evolved nightmares. For the first time, the abyss trembled before monsters that had gained levels and the ability to challenge the ancient lords. And now this new formidable force was about to engage in a decisive battle with the grinning evil. The abyss has always been a cruel crucible where only those who devour their own kind survived. But even the most insatiable monster risks turning into lifeless prey at any moment. She fought her way through mountains of corpses, showing no mercy and striving for the absolute top. And when it seemed that her triumph over the weak would never end, an insurmountable wall stood in her way. The one whose name even the most ancient creatures feared appeared, the great and merciless Duke. In an instant, her pride was trampled and her body pierced by merciless scarlet blades. The confrontation was over almost as soon as it began, revealing a colossal gap in their strength. The ruler looked at her futile attempts to resist fate with a contemptuous grin. He reminded her of the cruel law of this world. The limit of each monster's power is predetermined even before its birth. However, a dangerous glimmer flashed in the ancient lord's eyes, promising a loophole in the unshakable rules of the abyss. Extending his hand, he offered her the only way out, to renounce her freedom and kneel before him. The wounded body shook with impotent rage, but the thirst for power proved stronger than pride. Squeezing the outstretched hand, she agreed to this dark deal, sealing her loyalty with blood. A new, previously unseen power overwhelmed her mind, bestowing upon her the crown of a true nightmare. Having sworn allegiance, she swore to herself that this union was only the first step towards overthrowing the Duke himself. And now, having become the embodiment of pure destruction, she unleashed all her wrath on the impudent stranger. But reality dealt her a crushing blow again, forcing her to doubt her own greatness. Her furious attacks cut through nothing but empty air as her opponent slipped away with incredible ease. How could she, who dreamed of the throne of the abyss, find herself powerless in the face of an ordinary person? The illusion of superiority was finally shattered when a human hand intercepted her deadly blow. Her eyes, accustomed to seeing only the fear of her victims, now reflected a primal horror before a force that surpassed any laws of this world. Behind him, an image of true greatness was woven, suppressing the will with its mere presence. She desperately tried to retreat, but her once obedient body seemed to have turned to stone, bound by unknown bonds. The young man only smiled predatorily, looking at her pathetic attempts to escape from the deadly trap. Without the slightest hesitation, the blade plunged into her chest, tearing through the flesh and releasing streams of dark energy. He held himself so confidently and calmly as if he were not taking the life of an ancient monster, but simply taking what was rightfully his. But even on the brink of death, her pride demanded answers, forcing her to see in this monster only a servant of her sworn enemy. The stitches that held her mouth together burst with a crack, releasing the rage that had been pent up for centuries. Through the clouds of poisonous fog, she finally revealed her true name, claiming the right to merciless revenge. A maddened scream echoed through the surrounding area as her entire being turned into pure, primal destruction. Like the embodiment of nightmare itself, she rushed forward, ready to tear the insolent mortal to pieces. But instead of fear, she was met by the gaping mouth of the true predator of this abyss that he had summoned. A split second later, the enormous creature mercilessly clamped its jaws shut, devouring the remnants of her insane pride. The witnesses to this massacre froze in stupefaction, realizing that before them stood not just a powerful warrior, but something far more frightening. The winner himself began to slowly dissolve into the crimson haze, leaving behind only a sense of imminent threat. His thoughts were already racing ahead, calculating new steps in this deadly game. And behind him, furious energy began to swirl again, ready to give birth to a new monster for a new hunt. The mutilated warriors could only scream in horror, warning of a new, much closer danger. Right from the crimson pool of spilled blood, someone's ominous dark hand began to rise. A new silhouette emerged from the bloody lake, foreshadowing that the true nightmare for these lands was only just beginning. Before him stood the true progenitor of evil, whose sinister grin and crimson gaze foreshadowed nothing but imminent death. However, his opponent only grinned confidently, ready to accept the challenge of this ancient power and dispel the impending darkness. In the air, saturated with the smell of blood and ash, the words sounded, marking the beginning of a great confrontation between two unyielding wills. Meanwhile, in the very heart of the metropolis, plunging into night, at the association headquarters, a difficult decision was brewing. The head of the organization stood silently by the window, peering into the gathering darkness and sensing an imminent catastrophe. Casting aside any unnecessary doubts, he buttoned his formal jacket, ready to personally meet the approaching storm face to face. His gaze fell for a moment on an old archival photograph that held the warmth of past years. Those times are long gone, leaving only memories of friends, many of whom can never be brought back. But the silence of his thoughts was suddenly interrupted by an excited comrade who burst into the office with frightening news. Second counted as the situation on the front lines was rapidly spiraling out of control. The entire association and the entire world are waiting in anticipation of decisive action from those who are called upon to protect humanity. The leader, without hesitation, ordered the immediate mobilization of the country's strongest hunters, deciding to personally go to the scene of the incident. The assistant stood stunned, realizing the great risk of this desperate mission. Inner anxiety was reflected on his face because the lives of the best fighters were at stake. They started talking about the person who now essentially bears the entire fate of this confrontation, player Kim Tae-young. The leader understood that this young man had his own, incredibly thorny path, which they should not interfere with now. He is destined to go through the crucible of trials alone and fulfill what is destined for him alone. And the only thing they can do for him is to remain a reliable support and protect his rear. The image of this mysterious guy carrying an unbearable burden on his shoulders again surfaced in the comrade's memory. With this thought in mind, the two men strode forward resolutely, ready to fulfill their duty to the world to the very end. For time does not wait, and the hour of the greatest confrontation has already come on this tormented land. The sky turned crimson as the bloodthirsty creatures of the abyss spread their wings, foreshadowing their imminent death. From the shadows emerged the one who had ruled this nightmare for centuries, the majestic vampire lord Igman, who decided to personally assert his rights. But in the face of the enemy, Kim Tae-young remained unwavering, his cold, piercing gaze fixed forward. A dangerous spark of curiosity towards the impudent mortal flashed in the ancient creature's scarlet eyes. Even the master's loyal servants froze in tension, feeling the air around them grow tense. Wanting to avoid unnecessary bloodshed, Igmun promised the young man unprecedented power, surpassing the strength of his previous allies. However, only a barely noticeable, condescending smile flashed across Taeyong's face. The arrogant lord was not accustomed to such treatment, and a shadow of bewilderment distorted his noble face. A tense dialogue ensued, with each trying to probe the true strength of their opponent. The demonic ruler continued to speak in a condescending manner, absolutely confident in the superiority of his position. But the guy only calmly reminded that his alliance with the former forces was built exclusively on equal terms. After all, even the most insignificant rulers of this world understand perfectly well where the line of what is permissible lies. And then, interrupting the monster's protracted tirade, Taeyong decided to voice his own conditions. He extended his palm forward, imperiously inviting the vampire lord himself to bend his knee and become his loyal servant. Igman's loud, mocking laughter echoed across the battlefield, as he could not believe such unheard-of audacity. To instantly punish the insolent man, the lord summoned from the air, punishing crimson blades of colossal power. The deadly rain rushed straight at Taehyung, ready to tear him apart in just one moment. But the next second, the formidable weapon crumbled to dust with a dry crack, never having been able to penetrate his defense. And at that moment, for the first time, genuine, mind-numbing horror froze on the pale face of the ancient monster. With a slight mocking smirk on his lips, the guy openly challenges the ancient vampire, offering to finally engage in a fair fight. In response to this insolence, the skies above them instantly turn crimson, materializing punishing blades of colossal power. Igman, reveling in his superiority, unleashes upon the insolent mortal all the anger accumulated over the centuries. However, our hero doesn't even think about retreating, rushing straight towards the deadly rain of sharp steel. With just one sharp movement of his hand, he concentrates his crushing energy, preparing to deliver a preemptive strike. A blinding flash tears through space, instantly turning the enemy's menacing ghostly swords into useless dust. The monster's crimson eyes narrow in rage and surprise as he realizes how strong his opponent is. Unleashing the true, primordial power of blood, the monster causes reality itself to tremble under the onslaught of a new weapon. The guy carefully watches his opponent's movements, calculating the ideal moment for a crushing attack. He takes a firm, confident step forward, making it clear that this round is just beginning. Gaining incredible speed, he takes off, wanting to personally test the limits of the ancient lord's strength. A gigantic spear, capable of wiping entire armies off the face of the earth, dives down on him from above. Igman himself, spreading his huge bloody wings, personally directs this deadly blade to its target. But the guy dodges in midair and launches a lightning-fast counterattack, tearing apart the monster's defense with his claws. Dark blood spurts from a deep wound in the lord's chest, causing him to hiss with impotent rage. Gritting its teeth in pain, the monster desperately tries to seize the initiative, using its last reserves. And yet the young man's reaction is on the verge of the impossible. He dodges the blow a split second before disaster. Their fists and wills collide in an epic clash, creating a powerful blast wave that shakes the earth. Through gnashing teeth, the vampire acknowledges the astonishing talent of his opponent, who manages to fight so skillfully with stolen power. But in the hero's eyes, one can read only a cold determination to prove that the vampire lord has not even begun to see his true potential. As if mocking the ancient power, he mercilessly crushes barriers, revealing his true might. The vampire's eyes flash with genuine shock at what is happening. Igman immediately recognizes these deadly techniques as those of another great duke. It simply does not fit into his head how one person can own the legacy of so many higher beings. But there is no time to think. The air is whistled by merciless counterblows. Each of their attacks turns into a pure dance of death, where the slightest mistake will cost lives. The guy skillfully combines stolen talents, not giving the enemy a second to breathe. The arrogant lord feels his impeccable defenses begin to crack at the seams. The vampire's allies watch this furious and incredible confrontation in complete stupor. They can't believe their own eyes, because for the first time, the great ruler finds himself cornered by an ordinary mortal. Cold sweat and primal fear slowly penetrate the hearts of those who consider themselves demigods. The intensity of passions reached such a limit, as if two true rulers of the abyss had met on the battlefield. Our hero only smiles mockingly, reveling in the confusion in the eyes of his formidable enemy. The lord's wounded pride flares up with renewed vigor, eclipsing any remnants of common sense. With a sharp movement, he breaks the distance, trying to regain control of the fading battle. The space around him distorts as the enraged vampire summons hundreds of ghostly blades. However, our hero is not intimidated even by this colossal demonstration of enemy power. In response, he unleashes a devastating technique, calling upon the fury of the dragon itself. Having concentrated all his destructive energy into one decisive dash, the guy rushes forward. He is ready to make the arrogant monster feel the full weight of his accumulated anger on his own skin. A powerful blow cuts through space, crashing down on the enemy with all its crushing force. The deadly grip causes the monster to wince in pain, and dark blood spurts from the beast's mouth. A dark aura thickens around them, foreshadowing the imminent denouement of this mad battle. Breathing heavily, the young man peers at his fallen enemy, hoping that this nightmare is finally over. But the silence is broken only by an ominous whisper, and the sound of enemy blood dripping onto the ground. Suddenly, a black, viscous filth begins to rise from the depths of the earth, restricting the hero's movements. Reality around is distorted, turning the battlefield into an endless scarlet sea of unknown nature. The enemy promises cruel revenge for his humiliation, causing the guy to shudder with surging horror. An ancient, irresistible force awakens, subject only to the true master of this eerie space. In despair, the hero screams the name of the one he hoped to save, but his voice is drowned out by the smug laughter of the enemy. The monster's merciless gaze is fixed on its victim, leaving it no chance of escape. The bloody quagmire begins to pull the guy in, mercilessly swallowing his body inch by inch. Consciousness fades as he tries in vain to grasp hold of the elusive reality. The plunge into the abyss turns out to be unbearably long and painful, depriving one of one's last strength. Darkness and cold take over him completely, carrying him to the very bottom of this nightmarish oblivion. The triumphant monster approaches its lifeless prey, celebrating its easy victory. He is eager to obtain what this battle was fought for, the legendary key of the Great King. Reaching out to the crimson surface, the monster is ready to take its well-deserved reward. However, the next moment, triumph is replaced by the chilling realization of a mistake made. He realizes that he is in foreign territory, trapped inside the mind of someone he thought defeated. A strange voice, sounding right in his thoughts, makes the vampire lord freeze in deep confusion. From the crimson fog, distorted by a mocking grin, the image of the true owner of this space slowly emerges. The mortal welcomes the uninvited guest, making it clear that the rules of the game here are not dictated by the ancient ruler. The young man's inner world turns out to be an endless abyss, where the lord's arrogant grandeur dissolves without a trace. Many have tried to unravel its true essence, but have left empty-handed, leaving only unanswered questions. Enraged by the silence, the vampire calls upon his faithful crimson blades, demanding submission and recognition of his unquestioned power. But his pompous speeches only cause his opponent to feel slight disappointment in the arrogance of those who call themselves rulers. He reminds the ancient creature of a simple truth: even above the highest peak, there is always a higher mountain. The confrontation flares up again as two monstrous wills collide in the silent void. The young man takes a step back, as if luring the overconfident enemy deeper into his deadly domain. The vampire lord, blinded by rage, still considers his opponent to be nothing more than a pathetic nobody, unworthy of his attention. But at that moment, reality around begins to distort, giving birth to something indescribable and frightening. Before the eyes of the stunned vampire appears the legendary bloodsword, whose mere presence instills primal terror. And before the enemy has time to realize the danger, the trap slams shut, depriving him of any hope of salvation. The boy smiles with anticipation, realizing that the power of such a powerful creature will become an exquisite delicacy for him. Unable to bear such humiliation, the Bloodlord shudders with rage, ready to unleash his full wrath. He unleashes colossal dark energy, desperately trying to crush this nightmare and uncover the secrets of his tormentor. But the young man merely watches these pathetic efforts with cold blood, comparing the Lord's insane ambitions with the stupidity of a butterfly flying towards a fire. It's time to show the overconfident invader a side of power he never even suspected existed. A merciless ocean of scarlet blood rises like a giant wave, finally burying the remnants of vampire pride. To resist the alien domain, one must awaken one's own power, capable of crushing reality itself. The arrogant vampire realizes too late that his supposed superiority has evaporated without a trace. The first crushing blow breaks the silence, catching the ancient monster off guard. A blast wave of pure fury tears through the crimson mist, knocking the enemy back. But even defeated, the Lord of Darkness refuses to believe to the last in the insignificance of his powers in the face of man. Blood sprinkles the ground, and for the first time a shadow of true despair appears on the immortal's face. However, this is only the beginning of a harsh lesson designed to show the true price of weakness. The predatory grin on the young man's face leads no doubt there will be no mercy in this battle. A lightning-fast attack makes the enemy shudder again from unbearable pain. Desperate to regain control, the vampire unleashes his most deadly crimson claws. But his chaotic attacks are instantly drowned out by a merciless hail of incessant counterblows. The age-old confidence in one's own invincibility crumbles to dust under the onslaught of this insane power. A steel grip mercilessly squeezes the head of the defeated predator, depriving it of the slightest chance of escape. With incredible strength, the proud aristocrat goes straight into the arms of solid ground. From this crushing throw, the monster flies away, losing the remnants of its former greatness. Choking with rage and powerlessness, he chokes on his own dark blood. His eyes, burning with hatred, drill into the silhouette of the one who dared to so cruelly bring him down to the ground. But in this mad whirlwind of battle, he no longer has time for empty curses. The young hunter looks down on his opponent from a height of absolute, undeniable triumph. And when a gigantic column of blood rises into the very sky, it becomes clear the outcome of this duel is already predetermined. A meeting that no one expected awakens in the triumphant enemy only a sinister, arrogant grin. The defeated Duke drowns in the crimson haze of his own powerlessness, unable to accept his defeat. But the thirst for revenge forces him to gather the last grains of his former greatness into a crushing stream of rage. The brazen challenge only provokes the predator, who is ready to strike back with a deadly blow. Space is torn in two as the monstrous defenses are shattered by the onslaught of pure power. The hunter rushes forward, fearlessly diving into the very epicenter of the raging chaos. Dodging deadly flashes, he glides along the line of life and death, guided only by the instinct of survival. A sudden counterattack catches him off guard, causing him to lose his balance for a moment. But even falling into the abyss, he manages to regroup, refusing to give up the initiative to the enemy. Wounded and bleeding, the Duke rises again, clutching his last sinister weapon. His insane gaze reveals only primal hatred and a desire to wipe the offender off the face of the earth. A legendary blade capable of absorbing the very essence of an enemy, it reveals its dark, sealing power to the world. The realization of the threat instantly sobers up the arrogant invader, making him regret his momentary lapse of vigilance. The deadly steel is raised for a decisive, unstoppable blow that brings certain death. Finding himself on the brink of death, the uninvited guest decides to turn to the power that has been sleeping deep inside him all this time. It's time to take back control and let the true owner of the body put the finishing touches. Awakened from a long sleep, Kim Tae-hyung accepts this challenge with a furious, determined cry. A deafening explosion of primordial energy shakes the entire battlefield, marking the triumph of true will. Gasping for breath in the middle of the scorched desert, the young man can barely stand on his feet from exhaustion, and the defeated Duke can only contemplate in silent horror the collapse of his greatness before the face of a common man. Breathing heavily, Tae-hyung feels the last remnants of strength leaving his tortured body. But before the darkness can take him, Rosaria breaks through the barrier, ready to protect her contractor at any cost. Covering the young man with her powerful wing, the demoness looks anxiously into his exhausted face. Her eyes are blazing with rage, because no one dares to harm with impunity someone who has linked their fate with her. The defeated Duke gnashes his teeth in impotent rage, realizing that his plans have come to an end. The bleeding enemy is forced to admit defeat and announce his shameful retreat. As he plunges into the crimson abyss, he casts one last hate-filled glance, vowing to one day take back what he considers his. Tae-hyung only silently watches the dissolving silhouette of the once formidable enemy. When the dust finally settled, a welcome but frightening silence fell over the parched plain. The tension subsides and the exhausted young man falls limply to his knees before his ally. With difficulty forcing out a weak smile, he turns to his savior, losing the last shreds of consciousness. Rosaria just silently shakes her head, genuinely surprised by the resilience and audacity of this fragile man. Falling asleep right in the arms of the great demoness, Tae-hyung finally finds the peace he longed for after such an exhausting battle. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, a deafening alarm suddenly cuts through the night silence of the secret facility. The mad grin of an uninvited guest, breaking through the magical protection, foreshadows the beginning of a new catastrophe. Elite operatives rush through the base's corridors in panic, trying in vain to prevent the inevitable breakout. An experienced commander gives a desperate order to block all exits, realizing the seriousness of the impending threat. And along the dark highway, a truck carrying something extremely valuable is already speeding away at breakneck speed. The conspirators sitting inside peer tensely into the night darkness, hoping to disappear into the shadows forever. But at that very moment, an assault squad crashes down the doors of the shelter, ready to crush the minions of the evil guild once and for all. The sudden invasion takes the fugitives by surprise, leaving them frozen in silent shock. Turning around at the sound of the thunder, they realize that their escape routes are completely cut off. From the clouds of dust and the bright light of the spotlights, the majestic figure of the one whose appearance promises them inevitable death emerges. The stern gaze from under the blindfold leaves the conspirators no chance of mercy. The shadow itself appeared behind them, silently calling for silence before the imminent reprisal. Cold sweat runs down the leader's face, realizing the hopelessness of their situation. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, a black limousine is speeding down a deserted highway. He parks on a deserted industrial outskirts where a secret meeting is to take place. A confident woman emerges from the car, ready to personally confirm her long-held suspicions. An influential businessman whose betrayal can no longer be hidden takes a step towards her. All the cards are on the table right here, on the dusty site of an abandoned factory. A triumphant smile appears on her face, after all. This meeting only confirms what they knew from the very beginning. Behind the thirst for profit and the endless growth of the corporation's shares lay a dirty deal with the devil. But flirting with evil never goes unnoticed for those who overestimate their strength. The businessman only cynically justifies his actions, claiming that he was guided solely by business interests. But for her, these pathetic excuses sound like an admission of her own weakness and worthlessness. His face is distorted by a malicious grin, revealing the true, bestial nature of the traitor. Realizing that there is nowhere to retreat, he releases colossal destructive energy, preparing for a mortal battle. A momentary flash of surprise at such a desperate step from her opponent flashes in her eyes. However, an insane power already flows through his veins, foreshadowing an inevitable and brutal clash. By declaring that he has transcended human limits, he unleashes the power of true rebirth. Eerie, ghostly shapes rise up behind him, causing those present to shudder with primal fear. Even the most experienced fighters freeze in place, realizing how colossal the threat now stands before them. His wild gaze and sinister grin leave no doubt there will be no mercy for anyone in this battle. And the first devastating attack falls on Yu Ah-yeon, catching the strongest player off guard. Her comrades immediately rush to her aid, ready to sacrifice everything to save their ally. However, the enemy repeatedly proves its superiority, easily repelling any attempts to seize the initiative. At the same time, the masked puppeteer continues to calmly observe the chaos from the sidelines. Realizing that they can't delay any longer, the heroes turn all their attention to this mysterious leader. Combining their forces, they unleash a combined barrage of spells and pure attack energy upon him. But what should have crushed any mortal does not even make him falter. With a slight movement of his hand, he dispels their most powerful attack, turning hope into absolute despair. The ominous darkness obediently reaches out to the attackers, entangling their bodies in a death grip and depriving them of the slightest chance of escape. At this critical moment, the squad leader realizes that the time has come for a decisive and desperate maneuver. Gathering all his will, the one-eyed warrior rushes forward, putting all his strength into one blow. His crushing blow shakes the very earth, momentarily dispelling the suffocating fog of corruption. But behind the enemy's mask, there still lurks only icy calm and scarlet eyes, thirsting for complete triumph. The grueling battle drags on, and even loyal comrades begin to tire of this endless battle of attrition. Trying to unravel the tactics of the invulnerable monster, the commander frantically searches for a hidden gap in its perfect defense. And he comes up with a crazy plan, for the implementation of which he will need the full dedication of each of the survivors. The enemy seems to be an absolutely unstoppable force, easily repelling any coordinated attacks from our heroes. His cold, assessing gaze through the mask leaves no doubt he revels in his own superiority. The strongest warriors retreat one after another, shuddering from the incredible pressure of his ominous aura. But the commander knows that any greatness has its limits, and he fearlessly rushes into the very epicenter of the storm. He refuses to admit defeat, learning from past mistakes and moving only forward. Every step he takes is pure calculation, with no room for fear or doubt. The key now is to time it perfectly and force the arrogant opponent to open up for the decisive blow. At that very moment, his faithful companion Ayan summons all her power, preparing to deliver a crushing blow from the rear. A massive ice hammer crashes down onto the battlefield, bringing with it the breath of death itself. The overconfident villain realizes too late that his flawless defense has suffered a fatal flaw. The commander activates the hidden reserves of his body, directing all his will to maintaining control over the situation. The surrounding space explodes into giant ice peaks, trapping the enemy in a deadly embrace. The freezing cold penetrates even the strongest armor, causing the air to ring with colossal tension. A white mist envelops the battlefield, hiding the aftermath of this devastating clash of elements. The stunned allies stand still, hoping that this monster has finally been dealt with once and for all. However, through the clouds of steam, an ominous cracking sound can be heard. The mask of the mysterious enemy is beginning to crack. The monster's disfigured face reveals a haughty grin to the world, indicating that this is far from the end. But even in the face of the impending threat, the commander does not intend to retreat even a step, furiously shouting out his answer. The villain only mockingly admits that this fight was just a diversionary tactic for the theft of valuable data. Realizing that time is running out, the heroes once again join forces, ready to pursue the elusive enemy to the very end. The looming threat of a demonic world breakthrough forces the heroes to act without delay. However, a heated debate erupts among the allies about how exactly to confront the impending disaster. But there is no more time for empty disagreements. They face a common enemy that exceeds all expectations. Our heroine grips her weapon tighter, ready to take on any challenge that fate throws her way. Even seasoned warriors are frozen in amazement, realizing the scale of the impending clash. A shadow of doubt crosses the experienced leader's face, giving way to grim determination. The next moment, a swift crimson flash tears through the air, bringing death. The enemy doesn't even have time to scream when the crushing blow hits him. An otherworldly azure energy, surpassing human limits, flashes in the girl's eyes. The defeated enemy cannot believe until the very end that he was defeated by a fighter whom he considered an ordinary S rank. But the heroine's true strength has long since gone beyond the usual classification. But just recently, her path seemed completely different, quiet and measured. It all started in the training hall when Taehyung suddenly proposed a crazy training plan. At first, she was clearly skeptical about the idea, not wanting to waste precious minutes on a simple routine. But the guy firmly insisted that this was the only way to raise the strength of each defender to the national level. Realizing the full weight of responsibility, the girl could not cope with the overwhelming excitement. However, trust in her partner won out, and she took a decisive step forward, accepting his challenge. From that day on, under Taehyung's leadership, grueling, truly hellish training on the brink of survival began, and now, having passed through this flame, she was reborn as an indestructible weapon of humanity. The enemies are left to helplessly choke on their own blood, realizing their complete defeat before this absolute force. Finding himself on the brink of death, the defeated enemy feels the icy cold of the blade at his throat. In a frantic despair, he bursts into a scream, begging his hidden accomplice to finally intervene and stop this beating. And this call does not go unanswered. From the depths of the corridor comes the confident, heavy step of a new character. A true puppeteer emerges from the shadows with a lazy grace, bestowing a mocking, superior smile on those present. Recognition, mixed with pure, primal rage, flashes in the girl's eyes. Before her stands the one she least expected to see here. He greets her with an eerie calm, as if she were an old acquaintance, reveling in every moment of her confusion. Meanwhile, within the walls of the gloomy citadel, rising under a stormy sky, another force begins to awaken. Right in the middle of the halls, a blinding vortex of pure energy flares up, distorting space and tearing apart reality. From this raging flame of lightning, a confident step is taken by the one whose appearance is capable of changing the rules of the game once and for all. He glances around the battlefield and silently steps onto it, bringing with him an icy calm and an inevitable end to anyone who stands in his way.